Good afternoon. This is a workshop special called budget meeting with the Johnson City Commission and the Johnson City Board of Education on May 21st, 2020. Mr. Peterson, we will turn it over to you for an introduction and to help us get started. Is he there? Pete, you're on mute. Wendy, are you able to unmute him?
I'm trying to, but it won't let me. Is there something he's done? There you go. There you go.
Does that work?
Yes, we can hear you now. We just can't see you, Pete.
I don't know if the camera's on, Bob. There we go.
There it is.
Okay.
See your hand.
All right. As when we met last week to talk about the school budget and the city's budget in general, we were talking about the impacts of the COVID-19 virus on our revenue streams and the impact that was going to make to our budgets in terms of the reductions we were going to have to make and the challenges in finding the money to fund everything that we needed to fund. Part of that discussion revolved around the fact that the state of Tennessee is forecasting currently that they may need to go back next week when the legislature convenes and cut an additional $1 billion out of the state budget for next year. One topic that has come up every year that the state is financially challenged on their revenue stream is where do they turn to find that money? They pretty well have to fund TennCare and roads and education and those types of things that are just, pretty much mandatory expenditures. So, one of the topics that always comes up is will they go statewide and capture the remaining portion of the local option sales tax that is available and claim it for use by the state and preclude the local governments from taking advantage or having the opportunity to use the remaining portion of that local option sales tax. Currently, Johnson City's local option sales tax is at 9.5%. By state statute, the maximum allowable amount is 9.75%. Thus, we've got 0.25% laying on the table that's never been exercised to this point. In our last meeting, I think it was Commissioner Hunter perhaps that had mentioned, had we looked at the 0.25%, and
I don't know that you need to give anybody credit.
an unnamed boss of mine had mentioned, and I think it's a good exercise, that we needed to look at all the potential revenue sources that are out there that are available, and to talk through what would be involved if that is an option that is chosen to be pursued, the timelines, the statutory requirements, how much money does it generate, and to talk through the fact that what happens if the state decides to come in and take that remaining 0.25% that's available here in Washington County and use it to help fill the state's hole in their budget. So as a result of that, I asked Ms. Sandos to go back and review the statutes and to make a presentation to you today that will go over the statutory requirements that are necessary for consideration of a local option sales tax increase, and to go over timelines that would be applicable to demonstrate the time periods that are described in that statute. So if I could, I would like to ask Ms. Sandos to walk everyone through the statute and explain the timeline.
get too far down into the weeds, we're going to look at this in broader strokes right now. What the state has passed, it's a 1963 Local Option Revenue Act. And I'm going to briefly just kind of give you a refresher on the difference in the sales tax and the local option sales tax, because they are different and they're handled differently and they're applied differently. So we know the sales tax is the state portion, and the state is capped at 9.75%. The local option is capped at 2.75%. And that's where Pete's saying that we've got about 0.25% that is not being exercised at this time. The way that you exercise that is to levy that tax, and that would be the local option tax. The local option sales tax is treated a bit differently than the sales tax. It's only applicable to the first $1,600 of a purchase or for the services rendered. And it's a situs tax, meaning that it is collected in the jurisdiction where it is either expended on those goods or for the services. So it's all jurisdictional. And we'll talk about that in just a moment for how that impacts Johnson City, because as you know, we sit in 3 different counties. And so our option gets a little bit convoluted whenever you look at Washington County, Carter County, Sullivan County, and how we would exercise that for all 3. But talking about just briefly on the background of the local option sales tax, whenever we state that it only applies to the first $1,600, to put that into perspective, if you're purchasing a vehicle and somebody purchases a vehicle that costs $2,000, or somebody purchases a Rolls Royce, your local option sales tax is going to be exactly the same for both of those vehicles. So the states put caps on this amount. So the question is that I was asked to present on is, what's the procedure for how you actually exercise that? How do you levy that tax? If that was something that the city wanted to look at, what procedurally do we have to do? And then the other question is, if that's what we want to do, and we go through these steps, what's the timeline for doing this? And right now we're on a really short timeline if we're looking at the regular elections that are coming up in November. We've got 2 elections that'll be forthcoming, the August 6th and then the November 3rd. We're not going to hit the August 6th. There's not an option where we would hit that deadline, but we do have a very tight time frame if we look at the longest possible deadlines for the November. So looking at how you actually do that, how do you levy the tax? The tax would be initiated through a local ordinance. Johnson City's charter states that we have to have 3 readings to have a final ordinance. Typically on normal ordinances, upon that final reading, on the 3rd and final reading, once it's published, the ordinance becomes effective. With the local sales tax option, the county supersedes the city, the municipality's levy. So what that means is whenever there's a 3rd and final reading, it doesn't become final, it doesn't become effective upon publication. It actually gets put on hold for 40 days. During that 40-day interim period, the county has the option to pass a resolution that it raises its local option sales tax to match that cap amount. Because we sit in 3 different counties, we've got to look at all 3 counties, and all 3 have to do the exercise is the same for all 3 counties, even though we're primarily situated in Washington County. Because our effective municipality is in portions of the other counties, each one of them has to do the same thing. The rate that we have, and Pete could probably speak to this, I'm not sure exactly. I know for Washington County, we're at 2.5 on our local sales tax option, so we've got that 0.25%. I don't know what Carter County and Sullivan County are. We can have the option to pick whatever the largest amount is. That's what we pass. If by chance it happens to be lower in one of the other counties, or raised in one of the other counties, meaning our percentage is smaller than that 0.25%, the lesser amount applies to those other counties. So the state cap is at 2.75 no matter what. And then it's collected in whichever the effective municipalities are for the counties. So upon the ordinance is fairly straightforward. It references the applicable state statutes. It references the amounts that it can be drawn from. And it would go through the typical process of an ordinance for the city. On that 3rd reading, again, if it's passed, It goes on hold, the county gets their option. So if the county passes their resolution and they vote to exercise their levy, it goes into an election. And so we'll talk about the General Election Commission, how you get those dates, and briefly in just a moment. But for practical purposes, if it went to their general election, say in November, and it was voted on, which that would be the election typically that this would go in. We're about, by the time we end our process and give it the 40-day hold period, there's only about 83 days left for a 75-day notice. So we're looking at November in either option. But under the example that the county chose to levy their own, they go into the November election, the county residents in each one of those respective counties would vote. If they pass, the city's ordinance becomes null and void. It goes away. That becomes the county local sales tax option. And we're not going to get into the distribution of that right now, because we can get really far into the weeds, and we'll try to stay broad stroke on this. In the event that the county put it up in it went into their general election and it did not pass by the county voters, then we can exercise our ordinance. At that point, we would petition the county, the county election commission to give us a date for an election. And then it would be the city voters. So it would be all Johnson City residents within each one of the respective counties. If that passed, then it would become effective. It would have an effective date, and you could begin collecting no earlier than 30 days to the first date of the next month. So essentially, whatever the following month is, as long as it's more than 30 days. So that's how you would start collecting that tax. Now, if the county, within that 40-day interim period after a approval of the city ordinance, so this puts us back into July, and I'll go through what each one of these dates would be. If the county, each one of the respective counties, respectively, chooses not to levy their own local sales option, then again, we would petition the county election committee or commission. Each one of the 3 counties would then collectively decide when it would be put onto the ballot. We've got an upcoming presidential election, so that's the ballot that we would put it on. So it'd be the November 3rd. It would go on there, and it has to pass by majority vote. So that's the referendum vote. It can either pass or fail. If it fails, you have to wait at least 6 months before you try to bring it up again. If it passes, again, we talked about the effective date. So the dates are pretty well extended. Back in 2016, the legislature changed the dates for when you apply for your elections and when these hold periods occur. They're now between 75 to 90 days in different scenarios. So what we're looking at, if you wanted to hit on November 3rd and have it on a ballot, and this is under an assumption that the county chose not to exercise its levy within that 40-day period, you have to have a 7-day notice before you can have your first reading locally for the local ordinance. So if we were looking at a June 4th commission meeting, the notice for this would have to be on the 28th. That notice, there's certain statutory requirements for the notice. It's got to include the dates of all 3 meetings. It's got to include what's going to be on the agenda. So that would have to be May 28th. That's next Thursday. You'd have your June 4 reading for number 1. You'd have your second reading on June 18th. You'd have your third reading on July 2nd. That triggers the 40-day period. So that 40-day period runs through August 11th. The county each respective county has up till that date to determine if they're going to pass their own resolution to exercise their own levy and match that amount. Which again, if they do that, the city has to sit and wait to see what the election is. So if we get to August 11 and the respective counties have not passed any resolution, then we petition to have a vote. It would go on the referendum vote we'd have 75 days. So you can't be less than 75 days out. So that hits us in October 26th. And then the election would be November 3rd. So even though it feels like we're a really long way from there, it's pretty tight timeline. Are there any questions? It can be a really complicated statute, a whole chapter. And we have some different areas that we would have to explore depending upon what each one of the respective counties did. If there wasn't concert between the three, right now, I don't know how that would affect the passage. I don't know if it would affect if we cut on the county lines. But we're in kind of a unique situation in that we do sit in 3 different counties. But any questions?
Would it be possible for us just to do the Johnson City or the Washington County portion of Johnson City, or do we have to do all 3 counties?
We would have to do all 3 counties because Johnson City, the municipality, you're working with your whole border with all your corporate boundaries.
So what if just one county, say Carter County, wanted to get in on it, but the other 2 didn't? That's where you're saying you're not quite sure how that would play?
Correct. We would have to do some additional research and possibly reach out to the state for additional input on that to see exactly how that would affect the city. I have a gut feeling that it would act similar to if the tax increase rates were different between the counties, and that becomes a collection issue. But I don't know that for certain.
Sonny,
Yes.
the way that works, if Carter County were to max it out, then the sales tax collections within the corporate boundaries that lie in Carter County would fall under the rate approved by Carter County. The same for Sullivan County is still at 9 1/4. Washington County is at 9 1/2. And I think Carter County may be at 9 3/4 already.
Okay.
So
So
it's yeah. So it depends. Whatever the county does, that portion of the city has to follow suit.
Right. The state set caps, and so you can't exceed no matter what. So if there's no room to collect anything, you don't collect anything.
I just Googled Carter County, Tennessee, and it's 9.75.
Okay.
Right. Sonny, if the state showed interest in this quarter cent, what is the process they would follow? Do you know that, or have you had a chance to research that?
I haven't. No, I haven't looked at it from that aspect.
Pete, do you know? Do you have any idea?
Like Sonny, my gut feel is it would take a statutory change, because right now that 9 3/4% is reserved for local government. So if they were to capture the unused portion of local option sales tax, it would take a statutory change. Otherwise, they could just raise the state sales tax rate and leave the local option piece as it is.
And Pete, that kind of raises my question of, I understand there could be a sense of urgency to do this before the state could capture the local, but with 95 counties and you have some counties that have already maxed their local out and some that have not, I just think the likelihood would be the state would just raise their portion and not the local, because you would have inequality between the counties. I just didn't understand how the county could, or the state could, capture the local max from the counties that haven't maxed their locals out.
Well, the legislature, when they get in a really tight financial position like this, they will look at any and all revenue sources. This was discussed. Gosh, I don't remember if it was during the 2001 crunch or the 2009-10 crunch. This topic has come up in Nashville before. One thing that comes into play always, it's an election year. both at the state and local level. Legislators don't very often increase fees or taxes during an election cycle. So, you got to factor that in there somewhere.
Right, and I'd agree with what Robert was saying. I also think it'd be political suicide for any of the state legislators to go ahead and try and pass that now, because I appreciated what Jenny said during our last meeting, that the city commission is not looking to raise any property taxes for that very reason, that everybody's trying to recover from a pandemic. So I just don't see how, outside of the state argument, the potential fear of that, which I don't think is realistic, I don't see how outside of that we think that we would get voters to approve to raise their own taxes trying to recover from a pandemic. Because we just said you guys said the exact opposite into property tax.
It caps at $1,600.
It's a totally different topic.
It's related to your local.
Sonny, do those 3 readings have to be 2 weeks apart? Or can there be a special call meeting in between?
You could have a special called meeting in between. They just can't be less than 7 days apart. If you know that you're going to have a special called meeting to expedite that timeline, you would have to know that on your first notice. It doesn't, giving us 1 week in between would give us about a 15-day buffer on the back end, which isn't, it doesn't affect when you're looking to get into that election. If you've got a general or primary election that is falling within your time frame of when you petition the election commission for a meeting, they can move it onto one of those election dates, even if it falls narrowly outside. But if you petition within the time frame, which no matter what we did, we'd be petitioning within that time frame after, even if we moved ours up and still waited that 40 days for the county to make their election. So I don't know that there's a benefit of gaining 7 or 14 days.
I've got a couple questions. Pete, the potential revenue benefit, if it was enacted, that was sent out, the projection, is that based on prior to COVID sales tax generation, or is that based on some sort of expectation of a lower?
No, what those numbers are based on are actual audited collections from the years, I think 2012 through 2019. And we used the 2019 numbers to make, we just carried forward the 2019 actual collections.
Okay.
And that number is total quarter cents worth about $3.8 million.
And then I guess my other question would be directed more at the school board. I mean, to have this conversation, I think we need to see if there's interest of support or not. And so I was just curious to kind of gauge the feelings of the school board as to, kind of sounds like Jonathan would not be interested in this at this time.
Well, number one, it's not up to us, but yeah, we give you our opinion. That I just think this is the worst timing possible. Joe made a comment last time as far as the timing. Outside of the pandemic, it's an election year. And, that's just not a good time to try and pass something like that. So I just am saying, I don't think it's going to fly. So I'm not saying an opinion one way or the other in favor of it. I just don't think it's going to happen if we go through all this work. It's not going to be approved by the voters.
Tom, do you have any words of wisdom for us?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
If the school board is not 100% behind it, the city commission is not 100% behind it, more than likely you're setting it up to fail. This becomes almost like a personal campaign. You've got to, someone from city commission, someone from the school board has to become what I would call a dog and pony show. And last time when it passed, we even had to set up some kind of fundraising mechanism and actually solicited money to campaign for this to pass. So if everybody's not on board, the voters are more than likely not going to, well, they're going to say, well, you have 1, 2, or 3 out of 12 that are against this, so why should we vote for it? You just can't put it on the ballot, in my opinion, and expect it to pass. You got to work at it. And I've been on both ends. I've been on the losing end and I've been on the winning end. It takes a lot of work to get this passed. So.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I guess that's kind of after hearing some lukewarm feelings. I don't know that we need to beat a dead horse if there's people that are lukewarm or dispassionate about it, and that's not a negative. Just if we don't have 100% full on board, passionate people about it, then I think I kind of agree with Tom.
I'd like to add in there too that just, we can look at the number of meals that's been fed to families just through this pandemic with schools being closed. And I think it's pretty clear that our families are struggling. I mean, Johnson City is almost at the yin and yang, where we've got a lot of folks that are doing really well. And, the pandemic is just a bump in the road for them, but there's some families that this is a problem that's struggling. And I find that it would be very difficult to ask people to pay more on taxes to recover from something that they're already struggling. They were struggling before the pandemic. So I'd like to, see if we can come up with a different way. I know our school board has, Steve and Leah have sat down and tweaked and changed and switched and done all kinds of things to kind of make this work. And I'm curious to see what the city has done as far as a budget, if there's any tweaking on your end, or just, I think there should be a different way to approach this instead of raising taxes.
Well, in response to that, we've cut about $6 million out of our budget this year. There's about $5 million worth of capital equipment and capital projects that we historically do that we will not do this year. No one in general government would get any type of compensation adjustment or increase. And we're still planning on going to fund balance for about $750,000 in order to balance our budget next year. So we've made about $7 million total worth of adjustments over in the general fund side.
That's for the 21 budget, but for this year's budget, we are going to be drawing down fund balance. What's your adjusted number now, Pete?
Somewhere between $2 and $3 million, and all of that loss is going to be incurred in the last 4 months of the fiscal year.
All right. We're not really deliberating today, but just kind of stating some opinions. And I certainly, at some point in time, this $0.25, we've been talking about it for years. And I think, Pete, the time where it really got a lot of traction was in the 08, 09, in that period of time. I was on the school board at the time. And at some point in time, we need to capture that $0.25, for education and for, helping fund city services. I just don't think this is the time to do that at all. Now, if we see seriousness coming out of the state that they're going to try to get it, we may have to regroup and take a look at it again. But I'm like Michelle. I just don't think this is the time that we need to go after this $0.25. It's going to take a lot of legwork. And like Mr. Hager said, everybody has to be on board to really go out and sell this to the community. But we need to also make sure that the community understands what the eventual funding of education turns out to be for 2021. We need to be very visible with that, and what monies will be coming from the state to help make up some of these gaps that are going to exist because of sales tax decline. So that's just my opinion at this point in time. Does anybody else like to weigh in on it?
I already weighed in, but I have a question. On the school board, we did not get the information on the financial impact. Somebody mentioned a number quick. Can somebody summarize for future reference to know what the financial impact is if we do eventually do that?
The historical proceeds and audited numbers from 2019 was a total of $3.8 million. That's what a quarter cent on the sales tax was worth in 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And can you give us the scenario, what happens if the county joins us?
That scenario is with the county joining.
Okay, and so how much of that comes to the city and how much of that goes to the county government?
Well, what that number is based on is this. In 2019, the PEP fund got $2.4 million from the quarter cent, and the county's portion of the quarter cent that came back to Johnson City Schools was $1.4 million. And then, of course, the county kept a like number to that 1.4 in round numbers. I'm just assuming the split between city and county is 50-50. So the county would benefit by $1.4 million as well. So you take the 1.4 that schools get as a result of statutorily getting half of the local option sales tax, in addition to the other half of that quarter cent that the city gets. That is how you come to 3.8, and then the county would have the remaining 1.4.
So if the county did not join in, then we would probably see more than that. But those numbers were based on assuming the county would join in for that last quarter cent.
Correct. If the county did not join in, you would see 2.4 times 2. You'd see $4.8 million. Yes, sir. Now, we don't know the extent of this, and this is again one of those dives into the weeds. 2019, there wasn't any impact of online sales tax collections. So we are now receiving proceeds from online sales tax collections. But you've got to remember that when you buy something online, wherever you have that package delivered, that local government gets the sales tax credit. So if you've got people that live in the unincorporated areas of Washington County that have historically come to Johnson City to shop, we would get the benefit of the local option sales tax. If they choose to purchase online and they live in the unincorporated areas of Washington County, then Washington County is going to get the full impact of that online sales tax. So these are not super concrete numbers, but they're probably plus or minus 3 to 5% anyway. I mean, they're good enough to use for conversation at this point.
Right, because when those people ordered online before, then neither one of us got the sales tax.
Right.
So could be a moot point if they're still shopping at the same rate online.
Yes.
And some of that local option sales tax is already going exclusively to education. So funding ADM, it doesn't really matter whether it's collected in the incorporated or unincorporated area. We're going to get our 48% or whatever it is.
You'll get the 48% of the 1/8 cent. Yes, sir.
Right. I wish they could have made it more complicated just so it'd be more interesting.
Sonny's presented a pretty crunch timeline if this is deemed to go forward at all. I guess probably in our, to end our workshop, if there's no other comments on it, we just need to make a decision on whether to proceed to the next step in moving this forward.
Mayor, if I could,
Right.
I would add one thing.
Yes, sir.
This does not have to happen at a regularly scheduled election. The scenarios that Sonny laid out revolved around a regularly scheduled general election. You can have a special called election for a sales tax referendum, which allows you to do it at any time you want to. You will probably be charged for the cost of that. And the last time we did a city election on a date different from a regularly scheduled general election, the cost was about $75,000. So just want to make sure you knew that option was out there if someone wanted to pursue that later.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
my sense of this is to pursue this in the current environment is to seem totally tone deaf. I think to voters who are feeling the economic pressure of what's going on right now, being asked to vote to raise their taxes. Oh yeah, by the way, it's a tax that we've seen diminished collections on. So we're going to raise the rate on something that is being charged against at least in the present environment, a reduced number is just going to seem, there's going to be a lot of dissonance in the minds of those who hear us try to make that case. I think there is a case to be made for it. I'm just not sure that in the current environment, we're setting ourselves up for at least a reasonable prospect of success.
Okay, well said. Thank you. Others?
Can you tell us what our neighbors are going to do? Is there conversation already in the other counties or cities that I'm not familiar with their percentages? Do you know what's going to happen around us?
Sullivan County is in the midst of a discussion now about raising local option sales taxes to the maximum amount in Sullivan County. They've got a meeting I want to say one day next week, Commissioner, by the county commission to talk about approving an ordinance that would call for the referendum. So actually what the elected bodies do, all you do is pass an ordinance calling for a referendum, and the actual decision as to whether or not to raise the rate is made solely by the voters who participate in the election. And as far as Sullivan County rate, I think the county rate over there is 9.25 right now.
I'm looking at that online, Pete. It's 9.25 everywhere except for Kingsport, which is 9.5.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So if the county only did this, Pete, then it would apply though to the cities as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the city residents themselves they would vote as county members.
Correct.
Okay.
Mayor.
All right, any other comments?
Mayor Brock,
Yes, sir.
for my 2 cents worth, sitting here listening, I believe this is an idea that needs to be brought up at a later time. Again, I'll repeat myself, but if the two bodies are not 100% behind this, the chances are not
Right.
good that this would pass.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hager. I think some of the other numbers that we're going to be receiving here sometime in the near future is what our unemployment rate's going to be. And so if we have 15, 17% unemployment in our area, it just goes and that just reinforces what several have brought to the table here. It's just the environment, everything that's going on would be a real hardship on our citizens. We know it's going to be a tough year. There's just no two ways about it, but I know we will we'll all pull together and get through this. And hopefully the best thing we can do is to continue to invest in our community to try to get these jobs back and get people back working. Unless somebody wants to argue in the other direction, I think what I'm hearing as well that, timing wise, this is not the time to do this. We need to continue to study it. We need to keep our eye on Nashville, and then go after any other dollars we can get from Nashville for sure for education. Is there any other comments or questions that haven't been answered? Okay. Well, hearing none, we have a commission meeting starting in just a few minutes as well. So we will, I'll end the workshop and budget session, and there goes Mr. Hager with his mask on. Looks really good, Tom. Thank you. But thank you everybody for dialing in and, having a good conversation about this. I think we've had to have the conversation. I think it's important that we do, and we will, we'll continue in the future. So thanks a lot. With that being said, I'll end the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.